Of course, you want to check the connection IG. Good evening, everyone. Welcome tonight, June 1st, 2021, to Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint. Thank you for those of you who continue to check in, chime in, and track with us. This evening, we're going to always start off with a data check as to where we are, what's going on across the country, where we are particularly in Massachusetts. Where do we see movement? What's happening there? And then from there, I'm going to jump in, talk a little bit about, I guess, something that's been on my mind when it comes to the conversation around equity. We've talked about it a little bit more, but this idea, I guess, of legacy equity, and then take a look at what the CCC's been up to, what they've been doing, and how they've been pushing the needle, if at all, on equity. And then we'll just wrap it up wrap up the conversation this evening pretty briefly in terms of the role that each and every one of us plays when it comes to equity, and ensuring that those who are doing the work around equity are getting the just credit without necessarily doing any type of, I guess, prideful plugs, if you will. So with that, let's talk about the data. Across the country, we still see both states having conversations about legalization, going back and forth. I think Connecticut is one of the big ones that in our local area, I guess, if you will, folks are paying attention to. And then also on the national front, the MORE Act, which is the federal act that would result in legalization on a federal level. That bill has been reintroduced. Now, I say it's been reintroduced because it comes up several times throughout the year, and over the last couple of years, it has come up several times, but it doesn't make it past the Senate for them to actually vote it into legalization, which on one end may be okay until they get certain things right. And from the perspective of equity, we definitely are. So there are some things that they need to get right, and we need to be seeing in these bills that they're pushing forward, and to ensure that they're not just focusing on taxation and the monetary benefits, but they're also looking at what are the reparative measures that are going to be put in place to address those who have been harmed by prohibition, those who continue to be harmed by prohibition. And so we talk about the legacy market, the legacy industry. In that legacy market, in that legacy industry, there are certain folks, particularly Black and Brown people, who have traditionally been targeted, disproportionately harmed, their communities, et cetera. You know, this is something that we constantly say, and I think I look for ways to communicate this to the community as on this platform so that folks can understand it. They can shake the stigma that's been created, and the way we look at cannabis, the way we look at cannabis rollout, cannabis legalization, and particularly conversation around equity for cannabis. Massachusetts, we take pride in the fact that we have legislated equity, but then we've opened equity up for everyone. So now it becomes there becomes the need to make sure that we're explicit on who we're talking about. We were explicit when we were pushing for legalization as to who we were talking about. So now when we're talking about businesses opening up, people having access, equitable access, what does that mean? What does that look like? And so let's talk about that data in Massachusetts. We have 243 businesses that are operational. Again, so we're going to see the numbers probably be slow for the next couple of weeks when it comes to businesses that are operational. And then perhaps as we see the commission roll out the new licenses and deal with the rolling applications coming in from there, we may have an uptick in the numbers of licensees that are becoming operational. And then also with respect to provisional licenses or final licenses, that data doesn't come. The gist of it is where we are with businesses that are operational in Massachusetts. We have 243 businesses operational, and our numbers are still the same, with 4 businesses being economic empowerment owned. And then we have 2 that are identified as social equity participants that are owned by social equity participants, and about 12 no, I want to present it 11 that are DBE owned. And then we have one that identifies one entity, one license that has opened up, and they identify as both a social equity program participant and a DBE participant. And so one of the things I want to highlight with Massachusetts and how Massachusetts has selected to move with legalization. Massachusetts is a highly regulated market. A few weeks back, in one of our equity minutes conversations, I highlighted the fact that Oklahoma, their market, I think at the time, the data point I shared was about 7,000 licenses. And I received updated information about the fact that it's actually 9,000 licenses that have been issued in the state of Oklahoma. 9,000 licenses. And folks may try to argue that, well, in that type of market, you're going to see more diversity. And based on the information that I was able to gather, and I will highlight Cannaclusive. Cannaclusive is a group of Black women out in, I think out of Cali. They've created a platform where they have a database. They call it the Inclusive Database, where they've highlighted Black-owned businesses. Based on the data that they've put out and capturing the licensees in Oklahoma, there are about 70 licenses that are Black owned. And they actually capture Massachusetts. And for Massachusetts, I think they had about 5, which I want to be clear, I'm talking about Black owned businesses. Now, we've been saying that we need the commission to capture this data. What the commission produces is data around social equity program participants, economic empowerment certificate holders, and DBE owners. It's not clear of those cohorts of people, how many of those are actually Black-owned businesses? And I think there have been folks asking about that. Cannaclusive's database is a database that they update regularly, so much so that their information is up to date when I compare it to what we have here in Massachusetts on our tracker. And when you compare those two markets, right? So I said they have 50 in Oklahoma, Massachusetts, we have 5. And you're just like, oh, wow, 50 that's a lot more, but 50 out of 9,000. What does that look like in terms of participation from a percentage point? That's less than 1%, 0.7%, something like that. So I think there's a fallacy thinking that just opening up the market will allow for more licensees. There needs to be some structure and support. That's why there was a call for equity, because traditionally there's not a single industry where you see Black businesses, Black ownership dominating, or Black businesses represented in double-digit percentages. There isn't a single industry like that. So here it is, the cannabis industry, where Black participation and Black accountability in the legacy market was upwards of 60 to 70%. When you look at prohibition, when you look at the arrests, when you look at that data, and then disproportionately, we're talking about Black and brown people being held accountable for their participation at a rate of 3 to 4 times white counterparts. So when you compare, when you juxtapose that information, you're just like, hold on a second, wait a minute. We do need to address the inequities in a very specific manner for Black and brown businesses, Black and brown business owners. And so let's look at what the Cannabis Control Commission has been doing. I think when I set out to do the Cannabis Equity Minutes, I highlighted the fact that we would be looking at Massachusetts. What are some of the opportunities that are presenting itself for us to move the needle on equitable participation? Where are some of the missteps, which if you've been tracking with us, we've identified those, and what are some of the solutions to addressing those missteps? Again, if you've been tracking with us, every time we've identified a problem, we've highlighted a solution. And we do have one solution, which is a program that we designed that really gets at the heart of the barriers that we see consistently addressed, regardless of the market, for entry for Black and brown businesses. And that program being the PIES program. If you follow us, check out the blog, check out Mass Mother Mary's website, and you can get that information. And so one of the things that we've identified at the Cannabis Control Commission in the past was that there needed to be representation in that leadership that represented the population that they're at least looking to reach, and perhaps some have some experience in empowering this population. Because what we were seeing in terms of who was getting the licenses when this market first opened up, and in the space of under the umbrella of equity, if you will, what we saw, or what we've seen, is that women, particularly white women, are entering into this industry. Now, across the board, the representation of white women in leadership positions and executive positions in cannabis, in the cannabis industry, is greater than most other industries, period. So it's not surprising to see that. But what we saw in the commission was a commission that was led by women. We had 4 women, 1 man being on the commission board, and the executive director being a man. The commission has updated, or the staff has turned over slightly. The commission staff, that, if you will, has turned over slightly, and we have now several. We have 2 women of color on the commission. Particularly, in the seat of the social justice chair, we have Commissioner Camargo. I say all that to bring it to the conversation of something that happened over the weekend, which was Commissioner Camargo came and she did her first public speaking, if you will, with the media outlet. And she chose to go with Cityline, which is a news platform, a news series that is on Channel 5 locally here in Massachusetts. But the host is Karen Holmes Ward, who is a Black journalist, Black host on the show. And that's who she chose to go to. Why? If you look at Commissioner Camargo's rationale, was she needs to get the information about equity out to the people who have been marginalized, the people who she's been placed in that seat. This is something that we have not heard. So this is interesting to pay attention to see how this conversation rolls out, how this movement of the commission, the traction that they're taking. Are we going to see this type of action continue to move forward? And also, does it translate into us seeing more participation of the very people who have been targeted and harmed the most by the war on drugs? And so her justification was, she needs to reach her audience, and her target audience are people who are going to also be looking at another Black woman's show, that hosts a show on Channel 5. What was interesting was the caucasity that came out of folks who maintain the status quo when it comes to the media outlets, particularly with the Boston Globe. I think folks tend to look at the work of Dan Adams and his regular updates on Cannabis News. But what we found, as we looked at it from an equity lens, the story and the narrative that was being pushed forward was very myopic and singular, if you will, and not reaching the community. We have people today still asking, well, how they're trying to figure out about the economic empowerment program or the social equity program. And so these outlets, these sources, are not reaching our people that need to get that information. And it's incumbent upon the commission as a regulatory body. One of their responsibilities is the community outreach, is to ensure that the public, all of the public, if they want to have equitable participation, all of the public is aware of where Massachusetts is when it comes to legalization. What are the opportunities that are available, and what are the responsibilities of the municipalities when it comes to support and equitable participation, when it comes to ensuring that their communities, their local communities, know what the regulations are now. How can you consume cannabis? Who can access it? And breaking down a lot of the stigma that has traditionally existed around cannabis, and that stigma that has had a negative impact on Black and Brown communities, more so through the arrests, through the access to cannabis. I think I had a young lady who, she's 22 years old, and to this. She didn't know that she could go into the retail stores now and get cannabis. She thought she still had to go through a process and get a card and get. I'm like, no, you have a Massachusetts ID. You can legally go in there. You, your peers, your friends, and the information, it is out there. Yes. However, who's going to go to the website, and there aren't that many people that are going to sit there and read through 17 guidance documents, each of them ranging from, 2 to 17 pages of information to figure out, well, what are my rights, what are the responsibilities. And the commission has done an effort to try to make it more accessible. But in this day and age, when folks are looking for audio platforms, when folks are looking to news outlets where the information is easily digestible, quickly accessible, they need to be leveraging that. And so I would say taking advantage of platforms and sources like Cityline, perhaps like a Basic Black, these spaces where traditionally Black people, particularly, the older generation, these are outlets that they look to, where they would get this information and understand that, hey, cannabis not only is available, it's legal, it's being recognized for its health and medicinal benefits. It's and there are numerous properties that people of that cohort of that generation of folks can enjoy. This is now available. These are the outlets. This is how we reach the folks. So we want to see more of that. And I think Commissioner Camargo, in her response to Dan Adams from the Boston Globe, balking at the fact that she chose Cityline to be her first news outlet and not understand, because he doesn't understand equity, right? When you understand equity, when you understand the audience that you want to reach, that's where you make decisions and you take action steps that are going to align with that, right? So perhaps Dan Adams will get it now. I know Commissioner Camargo, she's going to be with the Boston Globe. She'll be chiming in because her audience isn't just the Black community. Her audience is everyone, but in delivering the message, we want to make sure everyone is able to access that. I think that's more than a generous plug there for from what's going on. But the equity minutes, let's be clear, I'm going to highlight the opportunities. I'm going to highlight what we're doing right and where we can continue to push this conversation forward. And that leads me to something that has been brought to our attention at Mass Mother Mary, and this conversation is emerging again, which is what's happening in the local municipalities. And the commission has a role in really directing that. They want to say that they can't control what the municipalities do. Absolutely not. You cannot control the votes and the bylaws that they put in place for their zoning and so forth. But as a regulatory body, you do have the responsibility to not just put out a guidance document. Again, municipalities consist of people just like everyone else. A lot of them are not reading. They are bombarded with hundreds of documents, emails, and so forth. So this information needs to be accessible and digestible. And so unfortunately, what we saw in the past was the information that was given to municipalities was that, hey, you can do what you want around equity. The state has an equity program. Local municipalities, you form your own equity program. And when we put out the Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report last year in April, of 2020, we highlighted the fact that that is very problematic, because that stance that the regulatory body in and of itself undermines equity. To say that, okay, we have a legislative mandate, but at the local level, you guys do what you want to do, it sends the wrong information out to the community. It sends a message that equity is not as important as it needs to be. Particularly, we have some towns that they have no clue what to do around equity. I mean, even with the city of Boston, it took the city of Boston a couple of iterations to get to where they are now with the type of measures that they're pushing forth with equity. And so and what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is different municipalities trying to grapple with it. And in the past, the social justice chair showed up in the city of Cambridge, I think, and I don't know if she showed up anyplace else to talk about their equity provision, but that this conversation needs to happen across the state of Massachusetts. It definitely needs to happen in every single community that has been identified as disproportionately impacted, because these communities are walking around with this title and don't have a handle on what that actually means and what responsibility they have when they are thinking about the bylaws, when they're thinking about how they want to structure their the cannabis, how they issue host community meetings and allow for community meetings and issue host community agreements in their local towns. This is the type of this is the role that the regulatory body needs to play. And with this day and age where we have this social platforms, we have Zoom, we have Google Meets, if you will, we have Microsoft Teams, we have all of these platforms that would allow for the commission to issue sessions for municipalities to tap in and say, okay, hey, look, we're ready to actually address XYZ when it comes to cannabis. This is what we're looking to do. These are some of the questions that we have. This is something the commission can do. And if perhaps it's not if they're not doing monthly or quarterly meetings for these municipalities so they can get it right, then they need to be putting out something that's more digestible, because it's unacceptable for the city of Brockton to come out and say that they are going to they're going to do their own thing, or the city of Boston or the city of Tingsboro. It's not acceptable for these individual Cambridge to say they're going to do their own thing, and these programming ends up undermining the state program, so much so that equity program participants aren't even able to pursue licenses in these communities. And then it's unacceptable that we leave some of the other smaller communities that don't have the bandwidth to get this type of expertise and understanding as to how do they embrace equity. I mean, it's not something that Massachusetts has a strong handle on. We're still working it out so that the supports are necessary. It's not fair to expect that these local the smaller municipalities are going to know what they should be doing, and know that, again, even the equity guidance is several pages long. Who has time to go through that and read the details on that? And then on top of that, there's misinformation in that. So I think it's important to have opportunities for municipalities to get this information right, and not put the onus on social equity program participants, economic empowerment certificate holders, on us as we are trying to pursue this gauntlet already. And then now we have to go and educate the people. I mean, this is constantly the issue that those who are marginalized are faced with. And to that point on Brockton, I will put a plug. Brockton is having an ordinance meeting tomorrow where they're going to be talking about their proposal to only have 2 delivery licenses in their city. This is a city that is been identified as disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So this is a city that is quote unquote majority minority. What does that mean? They have the majority of their population are Black and brown folks in the city. This is a city that has a lot of entrepreneurs looking to get into this space. And this is also a city that has a lot of people that aren't aware of the opportunities around cannabis. How do you know? How can I say this comfortably? Because if you go to the city's website, that information is not readily accessible. When you look at what Brockton has available to the community, if someone is in the community and they want to know, well, what can I do around cannabis? That information is not readily available. So that's flag number 1, and then secondly, when you look at these meetings that they're having, just in general, Black and brown folks are often in a state of, they're working numerous jobs. They're just trying to figure out how to erect their businesses, how to tap into the resources that are often just handed out to other populations or made readily available. And so I think there's a strong misconception that the public isn't interested in that. What, are you kidding me? These are people who have been arrested for their children, or their children have been arrested for their participation in with the plant. And now you want to say that they're not interested in knowing how they can participate in it legally, how they can how they can enjoy this plant, or how their children, and when I say children, I mean adult children, right? Because when it was, I'm talking about children who were penalized maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, 15 years ago from their participation of the plant. They're still dealing with that stigma. I've shared before, my family's background is Haitian. And so in the Haitian community, they're like, what? That is drugs. We don't want the drugs. No. And that's not where there's an educational curve that needs to happen with the older generation and with the community at large to say, hey, it's more than okay. There are benefits to that, and they need to be empowered with information so now they can make decisions. They can make informed decisions as to whether or not this is something they want in their community, whether or not this is something that they would like to participate in actively, whether or not this is an opportunity that they would like to see more people that look like them leading the way, owning and opening up businesses. Because rest assured, these businesses are going to open up in the community, and it's not going to be owned by the majority, by people who reflect the majority of the population. That's an abomination to anything around equity. And so the commission has a responsibility there. Municipalities have to communicate to municipalities and equip them for success in this, for when it comes to equitable participation. There's some missteps that happened in the past that need active correction and active communication to municipalities on how to go about doing this, and we see that with the host community agreements conversation. We're not going to see movement in equitable participation if we don't see it from the leadership down. And so I will give a shout out to the folks out in Brockton who are pushing hard for this. Jamal Brathwaite reached out to us directly and asked our take on it, and also just to give the plug on what's happening in Brockton and the need for folks to speak up. If you care about social equity, as so many folks in other communities across the state say that they do, then here is an opportunity to speak up, because Brockton is looking to say that they're only going to give 2 licenses out, and they want to limit, as they don't even want to let social equity folks who aren't opened up currently in Brockton, or economic empowerment folks who aren't currently operating in Brockton, even have an opportunity to open up and leverage this exclusivity period when it comes to delivery licenses. How does, in the spirit of equity, that's something that everyone should be talking about. And then also pushing for them to do more to support more equitable participation, more economic empowerment, and social equity businesses to open up. While this is a city that does have a cap on the number of retail licenses, well, they need to be, the conversation needs to constantly be put forth that yes, the community is interested in seeing that. You don't even need to live in Brockton. If you live near Brockton, if you frequent Brockton, this is something that impacts you all. It impacts us all, I should say. So that's my plug there. There is an opportunity to reach out, and I invite Jamal, if you have that information, post it up underneath this particular episode, so folks who are watching can get information as to how they can follow up on what they're doing with the ordinance, and we'll include it on all 4 of the platforms that we are on. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the conversation for this evening on this piece on equity. There are a lot of us out here who are doing the work and the conversation around equity, pushing the needle for equitable participation, and there isn't compensation tied to that. What we do see, though, is people tapping into this information, whether it's the PIES program idea and they leveraging it, or some of the information that comes out of the Marijuana Massachusetts social equity report in terms of what can be done, what are some of the actions that need to take place. And unfortunately, as a community, historically, we see that You know, Black folks put out excellent work. They put out high caliber information, and they don't, the credit isn't there for that. It's not given to them for it. We don't receive that recognition, and that recognition not just in the form of accolade, but also in the form of monetary compensation, in the form of highlighting where this information is coming from. I think that's a disservice to the community, because you see then people who may have the ability to also bring their expertise shy away from it, right? Because they're like, wait a minute, they're just going to steal my idea and not give me credit for it. But let, you know, white folks come in and do the same thing, which we've seen even in this cannabis industry here in Massachusetts. In full transparency, we've seen that, right? They come in and do that, and they bring them on as vendors. They bring them on as consultants, you know, and not that they were marketing themselves in that capacity in the first place. So I want to make that clear. And so I'll wrap up on that note. We talk about equity in the cannabis space. It is across the board. Equitable participation, equitable action, it is across the board. So to the businesses that are out there, the existing businesses that are operational and that are looking to do work around equity, there's opportunity for you to do equitable participation and not just bring on staff, hire someone in an entry-level position. There's opportunities when it comes to the contracts that you enlist for who you're getting your business services from. There's including advisement on how do you roll out an equity program. What are some steps, or what are some programming actions that you can take that actually will move the needle on equity and have some type of meaningful impact in the cannabis industry, right? And in addition to bringing on folks in leadership position, bringing on folks for board members position. Again, this message that I'm sharing here is not something that's unique to cannabis, unfortunately. However, this cannabis industry in Massachusetts is in a unique position that you can get recognition and credit for your work in moving that forward. What do I mean by it? It's part of the positive impact plan requirement. This is something that you can demonstrate, and it ties to that explicitly when it comes up for renewal. So that's the initial win-win. It's meaningful in terms of setting. Massachusetts wants to hold the banner up for being first in the nation when it comes to social equity, when it comes to legislation around equity. But then folks are looking at, okay, well, what are your outcomes around it? Around the legislative and the rhetoric that you push Massachusetts. This is a way that we can have the outcome and the outcome align with the rhetoric and the legislative mandate that we have. So on that note, I will wrap it up for this evening. And again, thank you to all of you who chimed in, checked in, and continue to follow up. Look out for more information on what I shared on any of these platforms. Check out our blog and tune in on Friday, where we'll have more updates on what's happening in the equity space here in Massachusetts. And if there's been any traction nationally, we'll bring that to the conversation as well. Have a wonderful evening. I'm going to end the live here. And yeah, I see on Facebook as I'm ending this live here. Let's close this out. So folks who are listening on these other platforms on Facebook, Jamal had Brathaway shared some information on what's happening in Brockton. Live. Good evening. Good there and here and there.